I've been reading your collected works between the two of you, Michael's translations of Peter's novels, for the longest time. And I never imagined at that point that I'd actually be sitting, about 2 feet away from you. So, this is truly where things happen on their own. How long have you known each other?
I think the first translation was quite early, 2001 maybe, or so almost 25 years now.
It would be Agnes, Peter's first book, then for Chateau and Windus. I can't remember the year. I thought it might have been in the last century, but
Yeah.
I mean, Peter has a bit surer sense of this than I do. Peter wrote more books, and I made more translations, and I've accompanied him for the last 25 maybe years.
25 years or so. Yes. So I'm going to put both of you on the spot and ask you, Peter, how do you see Michael? We'd like to see Michael, your translator, your collaborator, and I hope your friend by now. We'd like to see him through your eyes. And Michael, we'd like to see Peter through yours as his translator and reader.
Well, I remember when you always say that's not true, but I think it is true. When he did my first translation, I speak English quite okay, so I thought that I wanted to read the translation before it came out, and then I made a few suggestions what he could change, and I wasn't aware that Michael is the best German English translator, so with my stupid English, I thought he could change that, and he could change this, and I sent him a list, and he just ignored it. And so I knew that's my man. I mean, he knows what he's doing. So, and he was, of course, he was right in everything. I mean, I'm not a native speaker, so I have no idea.
And what's it been like since then?
We always meet in strange places. We meet not in strange places, but in very different places. We met in New York. We met in the mountains. We met in Vermont some years ago. In Frankfurt, and we don't see each other very often, but yeah, I would love to consider you my friend.
What about you, Michael?
Well, I've always, I mean, I think there's an element of formality and respect that probably characterizes both Peter's and my relations with all people in every direction, and we're not very communicative. We meet by chance. The books, the books are sort of where we meet, really. And that's been really, really fascinating, and I think a privilege to have accompanied Peter from Agnes and books of short stories and I'm in eight novels, something like that, 10 novels. One is coming out next month, the Blue Hour. In the Blue Hour, and I know Peter is writing a book of short stories. I've always been waiting to see what Peter will publish next, will write next.
I forgot to mention that I'm also his reader, of course. I read his poetry, I read his essays. One of my favorite essays is the one about Stefan Zweig that I've given to many, many people. And yeah, so I'm also your reader, not just your friend.
Yes. So I thought that maybe we would use the Archive of Feelings as the central point of our discussion to talk about your writing, Peter, and Michael, your approach to translating Peter's works, and indeed translations in general. And as a translator, I know that the translator is probably the closest reader of the text. I dare say even closer than the writer themselves. So as a reader, as a very close reader, how would you describe the Archive of Feelings for us?
Well, neither of us has a copy, um, so we meet there as well. I have sort of intermittent memories of it. I mean, it's this man who loses his job, who works in a sort of press agency as a sort of librarian. I mean, Peter's always very good, I think, at in the real world and in the practical world. He knows what jobs people do, and he gives them biographies, and this is a sort of a bachelor, a single man who is living in the house of his mother, who is deceased, who's lost his job, and who then starts to destroy or to take himself apart and remake himself. Is that right?
You're speaking of another book. You're speaking of the Archive of Feelings.
Yeah.
The last one. Ah, okay.
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
you were speaking about this
No,
one.
no.
Ah, okay. Sorry.
We'll come to that.
Okay.
Sorry. Blind von der Farbe. I mean, it always used to be the case that Peter's German struck me as of a particular, very Anglo-Saxon influenced, and really very short sentences and very plain vocabulary. So there's not very much for the translator to do. I mean, especially if the target language is English, which is kind of full of more or less this writing anyway. And so most of what I found myself doing was making two sentences into one, because the sentences were even too short for English. I mean, it was sort of too short for Hemingway or Kingsley Amis or any of these other kind of gods of brevity. So I would make the sentences a sort of a length, and sometimes make a word a little longer or something like this. This is my own vice. But it's really a dare to the English translator to how simple do you dare to be? Used to be, and then in the last sort of 4 or 5 books, I think you've complicated your style, and your sentences are longer, and there are more subclauses, and so on and so on, and it's got harder.
Do you have a response to this reading?
I don't really think much about how I write. I always say the style of an author is like his personality. I mean, you just have it. I mean, I'm not choosing how I want to write. I never could force myself to write in a specific way, so I just write as my tongue goes, and it's changing slowly through the years, but it's just my style, which I can't describe or change or, yeah.
All right. So, Peter, I'm going to give you a few keywords, and the words and phrases are solitude, the fragility of love, lost illusions, self-discovery. Now, these could be informing the novel that we are talking about, The Archive of Feelings. But it turns out that these are actually words borrowed from the description of your 2001 novel, An Unformed Landscape. So are these themes, do you think, I mean, 25 years is a long time to stay. So would you say that these are themes that you've consistently stayed with throughout your writing?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, absolutely. I always say I'm not writing books about something, so I'm not choosing subjects. I could never say I write a novel about the Second World War or about the passage to India or whatever. It's just, it's my world, and that's the themes maybe in a saturated country like Switzerland, where we have, I mean, many themes that you have in India or you find in other places, for us are not that important anymore. We are a rich country, we are a stable country. So the dramas in Swiss lives are mainly love and health and death, and I mean the big questions, not so much the organization of life.
That explains what a critic calls the relentless interiority of your works.
The what?
Your works are relentlessly focused on the interior.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Yeah.
You seldom look out.
Yeah. Well, I try to base my stories in, as Michael said, in the real world. So I do a lot of research when I write books. I wrote a novel about an architect, so I went to work for an architect for a week. Not to work for him, but to watch him working. And so I do a lot of research. I just was in Kosovo to research the Swiss troops there. So I do that. But it's true, what's important in my books is mainly what happens inside people. And so, that's maybe also why people can understand them all over the world, because, I mean, the outside is very different. India is very different from Switzerland, but the inside of Indians is probably quite close to the inside of Swiss people.
Closer. So, in this novel, you have this man, and by the way, why doesn't he have a name? I mean, even Francesca never, none of the other characters ever address him by his name.
Yeah. Quite a few of my characters have no names. Maybe because he's mostly alone in the beginning. So if you're alone, you don't call yourself by your name. You're just you.
Yeah.
And so maybe, and once a person doesn't have a name in the beginning, you can't give him a name afterwards. I started to write about him without a name, and having no name is like having a name. I mean, it's like his name is having no name. So I couldn't change it after a while. Yeah. No, I was just wondering whether it was an invitation for us to step into their shoes. Maybe, yeah. Maybe that's also the case.
Could be Arunava.
Very often my characters, for example, I couldn't even say what color of hair he has or what size or. They are very much alive in my head, but I couldn't describe them, the exterior.
So there's this man, and he archives everything. By profession, he's an archivist to begin with, but he quits his job and he brings the entire archives home to his basement. And now we see that he continues to go on with his archiving practices, but there's something else going on there. And he seems to be this seems to be the only way he can be in touch with his feelings, by putting them away in files and trying to connect with them. He displays no sign of them in his real life interactions, which are very few in any case. So what were you thinking here? Do you have something in mind? Why is it like this? Is he representative of something? Is he unique?
I think in all my books there are two levels. There is the reality, and then there is a fiction level. And here the fiction is the archive, and in other books the fiction is a book, or it's architecture, or it's painting. So it's always two worlds in a way. And I think for him the archive is like a safe world. I mean, it's a world that he controls, that he can change, that he can destroy if he wants to. I mean, he's like me in my books. I'm the god of my books. I can do whatever I want. And that's the archive for him. It's safe, but it's also not reality. I mean, usually in my books, reality wins. It's not fiction that wins.
Yeah, he talks repeatedly about writing his own life there in those archives. And he also says at one point that, towards the end of the book, that he's always found greater comfort and joy in in fantasy, in his imagination. And reality doesn't match up to it, except it does, he finds.
Yeah. Yeah, I realized once that in many of my books, I have characters who stop reading, who throw away their books, who burn their books. So it's almost as if I would write books against books. I think I believe very much in reality and not so much in books. And in a way, my goal would be to make books unnecessary and to live only in the presence. Maybe that's a Buddhist thing, I don't know.
So, Michael, you're also a critic, and if I may say, a critic who doesn't mince his words and who's famously known to have, some words have been used, such as evisceration of reputations. But there's the critic in you and there's the translator. So, what's the relationship between these two people when you're translating? And if you can talk to us specifically about any of these novels.
Yeah. I mean, when I translate dead authors, classic authors, I often get to write introductions to them or notes afterwards, whatever, and that's a sort of a privilege of a translator working with old material. I sometimes it's occurred to me I would it would be. I mean, nobody's ever asked me to introduce a book of Peter's, but it would be I would like that. I mean, I did give a talk on your work 10 years ago, and in German. I mean, you. I mean, I suppose, you know, I would say, I mean, it's, I mean, I translate things I like or things I love, and it's, I'm not, I'm a completely straightforward person, and I mean, I really following Peter and these kind of engagements with I mean, I could perhaps see it differently as sort of engagements with unreality, or the way in which that from the last sort of 4 or 5 books have become all sort of ghost stories. I mean, that it's almost as though the books have gone from being daytime to nighttime, something like that. And I mean, I would be interested in that, and interested in trying to say something about that. But nobody's ever asked me.
Well, no, we'd like to know, certainly.
But what would you do if you wouldn't like my books anymore? Would you still translate them, or just?
I think I mean I mean, luckily it really hasn't arisen, and it must be possible. It must be possible. I think. I mean, I do see my work on a book as a sort of sign of approval. It's sort of Her Majesty, Her Majesty's likes this.
Yeah.
So, Francisca is the object of our unnamed narrator's love. And he's named her Fabian for her stage as a performer. And you know this, of course, that in your novel, which was translated as On a Day Like This, Andreas goes looking for the love of his youth, who's named Fabian.
Yeah, I know this. Yeah, I mean, I have somehow. The characters of my books are like a family. I mean, they are all somehow related, and I never used the same character again. But I would say they are cousins. I mean, they play the same roles. There is quite often a lonely man. There is quite often a love from the youth. It's not the same stories, but it's like exploring deeper some relationships that I'm interested in. So I sometimes try to work on a theme or on a problem with different characters, but they are related, as you say. In this case, they have the same name.
Also, in almost all of your books, there's this whole idea of starting afresh or thinking about what might have been. And it's not just a rumination, but an actual course of action that the characters contemplate and even go out on. Is this something that you really think? I'm assuming you think about it a lot. It keeps coming back into your books.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting moments in life when something changes. I mean, I don't want to describe. I once tried just as a joke to describe a completely happy life, and it's impossible. I mean, it's boring. It's boring to death. It's okay to live it, but it's not okay to write about it. So to me, it's always the moments that interest me where something changes in life, through a separation, through a loss of work, through maybe even a sickness or death. I mean, when we are challenged to somehow rethink our lives. That's the interesting moments, and that's the challenge in our lives too. I mean, what do we do when things are not as they used to be? And I always say that I think sometimes people say my books are sad, but I think in almost every book at the end, people are better off than in the beginning. So it's always in a way, a positive way they are taking.
Yeah, I was very interested in that in Archive of Feeling, there's almost 3 levels of existence. There's the things that have actually happened and continue to happen in real life. There's this whole plane of imagination where our narrator keeps imagining these meetings with Francesca. And then there's the actual, eventually, and I won't give away any spoilers, but there is a narrative hook for all that, despite the apparent plotlessness. So do you know the end of your books before you start, or do they evolve as you go along?
No. It's really like making experiments. I put people in certain positions and then I start watching them, what they do. And in my last book, the one that's coming out in a month, I got bored by the main character, and after 60 pages, I just decided to make him die, and then I stood there without my main character and had to find out what to do now. So it's really going step by step. If there is a knock on the door, sometimes I don't know who's outside, and then only when my character opens the door, I know who's there.
That's actually fantastic. Michael, you've spoken about the way you translate. You've said, for example, that one of the things you do is not use the obvious equivalent word or phrase when you're translating. And that translation for you is certainly not about keeping yourself invisible. Yeah. You said, if it's going to be my words anyway, then I might as well put in all the dirty words I want to. Sometimes you are a bit worried when these quotes are played back at you.
Yes. I said that.
Yeah. It's in print. But can you talk to us about this in the context of translating Peter's works?
Yeah, I think Peter is very. I mean, even for something written in German, Peter is really unusually close to English, and you know, the word cousin came up. It's a sort of cousin to English through Hemingway, through Carver, who I think you would have started off with, and it really is. I mean, it's I think because German is as a conjugated declined language with you can write something that's a very simple sentence, and because it has this sort of minimum of correctness, it still seems possible. Whereas I think in English, this kind of really kind of outrageous simplicity is very hard, and my fear is lest it appear stupid, lest it appear something simple appears simple-minded. And the English, I think the English reader wants to be reassured all the time that she is reading something by a person of some intelligence, and it's that in as much as I have a task with Peter at all, it's to remind the English reader that they are reading thoughtfully processed sentences. And that hence I've ended up splicing two sentences into one, that sort of thing, and occasionally chosen a slightly eye-catching phrase or expression or something. I mean, just because it seems to me that the language demands it. And I think English is much more afraid of sort of nondescript, and I think Peter probably plays game with things being nondescript, or things being uninteresting, or things things barely getting one adjective, and that is that not an interesting adjective. These are all things that slightly frighten me as somebody who puts out a text in English.
And you've also spoken about the use of mongrel translations, not necessarily sticking to one idiom.
Yeah. Well, I no longer know the difference anyway. I mean, I've been teaching in America for 30 years. The lead Peter's lead publisher has. They were once in England. They are now in New York. I have a lovely relationship with I think a production editor. I think I'm not going to. And I'm allowed sort of 2 or 3 anglicisms in the book. So I say things like on the never never, or for hire purchase. You familiar with that expression? On the never never, where you pay down rates but you've never completely purchased something. It's very very familiar in the UK. Or on the blink. I think in the book called To the Back of Beyond, there are the pips for the 12 o'clock news. Beep 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 beep. Again, not known in America. So I also use Peter as my way of educating Americans.
Yeah, it's a lot like the English we use here in India, which is very much a mixture of influences from all over the world.
Yeah.
Your novel, The Sweet Indifference of the World, has this meeting between a man and a woman in a park, and then the man tells the woman things that she finds uncanny and is wondering what's going on. How does this man know so much of my life? Would you like to read us a short passage, perhaps in German and in English?
I don't have the German edition with me,
Oh, okay.
unfortunately, but I could just read 3 sentences and then you would lead 10 sentences, because my English is much worse than. But I try. We just start at the beginning. She visits me often, usually at night. She stands by my bed looking down at me and says, "You're aged." She doesn't say it in a nasty way, though her voice sounds affectionate, almost merry. She sits down on the side of the bed.
But then your hair. Sorry. But then your hair, she says, tousling it with her hand. It's as thick as it ever was. Only it's gone white. You're not getting any older, though, I say to her. I'm not sure if that's a happy thought for me or not. We never talk much. After all, what is there to say? The time goes by. We look at each other and smile. She comes almost every night, sometimes so late that it's starting to get light. She was never one for punctuality, but I don't mind about that. The less time I have left, the more time I allow myself. I don't do anything but wait anyway, and the later she comes, the more time I have to look forward to her. So there's some... Yeah, quite right. I mean, there's something very very intricate, very very sweet about that. But they really are daringly short, daringly short sentences, even in English, I think.
That's actually what many of my translators say, that the real difficulty to translate my books is not finding the right words or the sentence structure, but it's really to convey the simplicity without making it simple, as you said, without making it banal or...
Yeah.
Would you trust someone else to translate your books?
Sorry, would I?
Would you trust anyone else now to translate your books?
If I know them?
In case, let's say Michael is busy,
Yeah.
and someone else wanted to translate your next novel, would you let them?
No. No.
I wouldn't either. But
There once was a question about changing, because I think you had a problem with the editor, and then I said, no, please, I want to... in a way, you're at least as important as the editor. Because editing is also important, and I have a great editor in the United States, but But the translator is like he's my voice. I mean,
Yeah. It's the woman is called Yvonne Cardenas, and I have nice emails with her, and she does allow me these 4 or 5 anglicisms, which I mean I deliver. She really, I mean, these are lovely expressions, these are lovely words, and American shouldn't be without them. But she plays with me, which is great.
Yes, I mean, I'll just read one paragraph because there's so many places where I had to stop and read again, although I was desperate to also go on reading. To get a little order into my life, I set up rules for myself. To this day, I don't step on cracked paving stones, or if I do, then I do it with each foot equally. If I happen to fail, I feel an almost physical unwellness. It's Yeah, I mean, the magic is somewhere between the two of you. One quick last question, Peter, before we open the questions to the audience. You work with psychology quite extensively, and does that inform your writing?
I hope
in
not.
a big way?
I hope not. I mean, there was no creative writing when I started writing in universities. So I thought, what do I have to study to become a writer? And I started with English literature. But then I realized that it's like, it's not the same. I mean, studying literature is not writing literature. And it didn't help me at all. I found it quite interesting. So I decided I have to study people. And I started to study psychology. But then I realized that in psychology, you always have to simplify. I mean, you have a complex person and then you have to make a diagnosis and say, well, he's whatever, depressive or psychotic. So in a way, you're always simplifying things. And literature is the opposite. I mean, you don't have to simplify. You can show a character in his or her richness and just put her there and say, now you judge yourself. You can be the psychologist of my heroes. And so it didn't really help much, no. I did also, when I studied, I did all kinds of other studies aside. It was quite open at that time in the universities. You could just sit in every class you wanted to. And I did a lot of art history, for example. That was very interesting. Some philosophy, all kinds of studies.
Thank you. I know writing is not a very sentimental business, perhaps, and solitary, but a writer and a translator together, they've actually grown older together through 25 years and more.
And grayer.
And there's something very heartwarming about that. Questions? Yes, do I see a hand somewhere at the back? Yes, the lady there.
I thought it was quite fascinating the way you were talking about translating. Some of the things I know between English and German, for instance, is that a single word in German will be a huge long phrase, explanatory phrase in English. How do you deal with such intricacies going back and forth between words that don't exist in English but do in German and vice versa?
Well, I really think Peter writes an English kind of German, and I don't know if he does it for my sake or to make my life easier, but it may as well be. And I mean, it really has been a sort of a remarkably straightforward and remarkably few difficulties and few inadequacies. The stories really are written and set and peopled in a way that they can be read anywhere by anyone. It used to be that they happened all over Europe and the US and lots of different settings. I think they've become sort of geographically a little narrower. But I mean, nothing has posed a problem.
Thank you. Yes, lots of questions. The two gentlemen here next to each other, and then the lady here, and then the gentleman there.
Thank you. This isn't meant to put you on the spot, so I'll generalize it a little. Do you find, at least occasionally, that translations end up selling more copies than the originals, and what could be the reasons for that? You can use your own experience, but perhaps also generalize.
No, abroad I've never been a bestseller. I mean, I think I have a very literary audience. I get reviews in the important papers, but it has never been a best-selling book. It's I think the only place where they have sold more books than in Germany is China, but China is a huge country, so yeah. And I'm quite happy with that. I mean, I make a living. I have a great audience. People who, when I was in Iran, for example, lots of young authors came to talk to me, and I said I influenced their work. So that's in a way the best thing that can happen to you as a writer, that you somehow inspire people. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, not to put you on the spot either, but have you guys ever had a disagreement over a particular translation, and how did you navigate that?
Well, I mean, to begin with, and the word was navy blue. I mean, dark blue or navy blue, and this is the list that Peter referred to, the list of possible inexactitudes or whatever you would want to call them, or things that he invited me to think again about, to which apparently I made no reply.
Now you admitted it.
Yes,
no, but
the
afterwards,
lady
I mean, I was so. Then when I realized who he was and what work he did, I shut up and I just said, well, that's his book and that's my book, and he doesn't tell me how to write my book. I don't tell him how to write his translation.
Yes, the lady there.
Hi, Michael. Question for you as a translator. You said you translate things you love. Would you or have you ever translated a text that you fundamentally disliked?
Yes.
Or one that you fundamentally disagreed with?
Yes. Yes, it was a very unhappy experience. There's a German historian called Christian Graf Krockow, Count Krockow, and publishers pleaded with me to translate this book. It's called Anhand meiner Schwester. It's the story of set in 1945, when his sister, it's all this noble family and East Prussia and vast latifundias, and his sister is heavily pregnant from her husband, who's a Nazi soldier, and they are running from the Russians. And I thought this is really such an unimportant and unrepresentative and sort of mawkish German story that you really would have to tell hundreds of thousands of German stories before you reach that. And I felt very angry with myself for having agreed to do it. It was written in the first person as well. This man, who's not a writer, narrates this narrative of his pregnant sister, walking, riding, sitting in wagons, whatever, going west in 45. I remember the sort of the high point of my sort of really detestation of this book was when there was, I just remember the numbers. The sentence was 27 words in German, and it came out as 6 in English. And it ended up as being something like, we boiled and ate the potatoes. And that's really just an expression of my contempt, and I don't know what the other 21 words were, and then to my great joy, the American publisher for this thing was unhappy with my work, and it didn't even appear under my own name. It was redone, and I thought I will never do such violence to my own nature again.
I'm really sorry, but we're out of time, so maybe you can have conversations outside. But before we end, Peter Stamm's novels are available in the bookshop, and very importantly, Michael Hofmann's essays and poetry is available, and these books are not usually available in India, so please do get them. I've got mine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone.